Yes, hello to you all once again, and welcome back once more to Classic Dirt Bike TV as we begin our coverage of the two-day charity scramble that was held at the superb Cecil Pearson's racetrack at Ballysallagh Road in Craigantlet in Northern Ireland over the course of 2 days of Friday the 22nd and 23rd of July. So we're going to start our coverage by taking a quick walk through the paddock, and we're going to check out some of those very nice bikes that are soon to take part in this annual charity scramble here at Ballysallagh Road. And so first up, it's a couple of nice and quite rare Rind Tut Wasp bikes, and as you can see, our first machine here is fitted with a very nice Triumph twin motor that's bolted into that Wasp chassis. Now, Rind Tut Wasp were more well known for their superb three-wheeler sidecar motocross outfits, although they did still build chassis kits for motocross solo scrambles bikes as well. And our two examples here are just a couple of models that the Wasp factory put together. But as you know, it was Rob Rind Tut who started the Wasp company around the early 1960s when he was competing in local grass tracks and scrambles events on a sidecar outfit that he designed and built himself. And it was because his bikes were so successful that people then wanted Rob to build one of them for themselves, and so that was when he decided to set up Rind Tut Wasp motorcycles. Although I have to say that most of these Rind Tut Wasp frames were superbly engineered, and they, just like many of the similar Rickman frames, could take various different motors to power them. Now, this other example that we're looking at here uses a 350 Triumph twin motor, and both of these bikes were destined to be ridden by Philip McKee over the course of the 2 days. But again, another rare example of a Rind Tut Wasp racer, as you very seldom see these Wasp solo bikes nowadays, but if you were to go along to maybe a sidecar scramble event, then you're pretty sure to come across many of Rob Rind Tut's sidecar outfits still taking to the track. Now, I'm certainly no expert, but I'm pretty sure that these bikes used BSA forks with this huge alloy matchless brake hub at the front. But without doubt, a relatively rare bike indeed, and not only does Philip have just one of these bikes in his collection, he also has a backup as well, just for a bit of security should he have a problem with one of the other two. But just as in the similar Rickman chassis of their day, you could buy these Rind Tut Wasp frames as a kit, whereby you just then had to slot in the motor of your choice and away you go. But still another couple of very rare Wasps, but thankfully not stinging anybody just yet. Okay, so next up we have a nice trio of old workhorses, and here we have a nice CZ, an old RM Suzuki, and an even older Maiko there in the background, just for good measure. Now, I think these could be Eddie Murray's collection of race bikes, and I must say he's certainly brought along plenty backup and plenty bikes to choose from, and I just wonder that if you were to select just one of these bikes as your race machine, which would you choose? But I think if it was me, I think I'd opt for the CZ actually, and just keep the Susie and the old Maiko as maybe a standby bike to go to the burger van at the break time. But this old RM Suzuki certainly looks like it's had a hard life, but nonetheless it's still being used, which of course is the important issue I suppose, and even although its best days are maybe behind it now, it's still earning its keep on the racetrack. But I have to say that this CZ is certainly a tidy looking bit of kit, which I don't think is 100% original, of course, because it has a replacement exhaust system, and it's also had the modern gear shifter upgrade done on the gearbox and the replacement set of Hagen shocks fitted onto the rear, but it's still quite a tidy looking bike. Again, this old Myco looks like it's been through the motocross wars, and it looks like it could be maybe a 1978 Magnum or maybe even a 79 400 or 440, but you certainly can't keep an old Myco down, and these old racers are still as popular as they ever were. Now, more old Suzukis once again, and I think this could be maybe a vintage 1980 250 bike, and I think this is Tom Paul's machine that he'll be racing in the twin shock grade B class. But again, Paul's brought along plenty backup in case of any mechanical issues, because he's also got this other RM here as a replacement should one of them break down. But again, why have just two bikes when you can have three? And this is his trump card should the other two throw in the towel. A lovely side piper Czechoslovakian CZ. So it looks like a trend with these Irish guys to make sure that you have enough bikes with you on the day to make sure that you get the job done over the course of your three races. But again, a lovely trio of vintage racers from Tom Paul. Okay, so next up we take a look at Adrian Lapin's race bikes, and Adrian's first machine here is his nice 250 Husqvarna, and again this is one of at least three bikes that Adrian's brought along to this Charity Scramble event, although I'm not sure how Adrian actually gets the time to ride these bikes, as he's one of the hard-working club members that just seem to be doing all of the other tasks involved in making this charity event a success, but nonetheless a very tidy 250 Husky, and this number 2 bike here will, I think, be ridden by Adrian's son Chris Lapin in the Friday evening event. So look out for this bike on the track in the racing videos to follow. But it's a well-known fact that Adrian always brings along a plentiful supply of bikes to these kind of events, and in the past he's been known to lend them out to other riders with the likes of Tommy Merton, who you may remember was absolutely flying on one of these Husqvarnas when we visited this event. I think it was either in 2020 or 2021. And Adrian's also kept very busy doing maintenance and servicing work on other club members' bikes through his Lapin Performance motorcycle franchise. So he's not only a valuable club member, but a very good man to have around you if you don't know your way around these classic dirt bikes. Now, this next bike is another Adrian Lapin Husqvarna, and this is his big 430 CR example, and over the course of the 2 days I'm pretty sure that I saw Adrian riding at least 4 or maybe even 5 different machines, because he's also one of the team riders for one of Cecil Pearson's Jap bikes, but he was also riding his CZ twin shocker, and he was also on his Italian TM125 as well. So as you can gather, he's a very busy man as well as a valuable club member. But you have to say that these old Husqvarnas are well turned out and pretty quick on the racetrack as well. So here we have yet another Adrian Lapin bike, and this is his 380 CZ, not an original bike of course, but this bike here has had some very nice upgrades done to it, and this is another product that's been through the Lapin Performance Workshop. And as you can see, the gearbox has had the gear shifter upgrade done to it, and the clutch casing here has also been cerakoted with that hard wearing compound. Now the exhaust system is a reproduction replacement unit, as you'd expect from an older bike, and I'm pretty sure that these billet alloy triple clamps that you see here came directly from the Czech Republic as well. But again, a lovely twin shock race bike, and I expect it can't be an easy task for Adrian to decide which bike to ride next, but that's always been a problem for motorcycle riders for many years that have big collections of motorbikes, because unfortunately we only have one backside, so we can only ride them one at a time. Now, we certainly couldn't walk through the paddock of this Charity Scramble event without mentioning Cecil Pearson and this fantastic and very unique collection of Jap scramblers. Now, first up we have these three Harry Stitt framed bikes, which have these new chassis with the 1930s John Alfred press switch 4-stroke motors bolted into them. Now, this number 11 bike is Cecil's personal race bike, and these frames aren't copies of an old design. These Harry Stitt chassis are a quite unique and bespoke design for Cecil, but the motors in all of Cecil's racers here are these big, long stroking methanol fueled Jap engines, which were a motor that were originally designed for speedway bikes back in the 1930s. But among other things, these have dry clutches on these engines, and this alloy clutch cover that Cecil made is basically just to keep dust, dirt and moisture out of the clutch and its transmission workings. Now, the motors also have total loss oil lubrication, no sump of course, you just top up the frame with oil, and this little pump then pushes it around the motor and then out onto the ground. But don't be fooled by these bikes' vintage looks and antiquated power plants, because they may look like they've come straight from the early 1900s, and I suppose engine-wise they have, but these are seriously quick machines, as I'm sure that you'll all find out when you watch the racing footage, which I'll be posting very soon. So those are a quick look at the three Harry Stitt race bikes. But of course, the remaining 6 Jap scramblers are all made up from using 1960s Rickman frames with more of those John Alfred press switch motors to power them. And when you eventually check out the racing from this event, make a mental note here of this number 26 bike, which will be ridden by one of Cecil's team riders called James Thompson. And if you'd like an idea of just how quick and competitive these old Jap scramblers are, then look out for James on this number 26 machine. Although in terms of their uniqueness, I'll wager that there's not another collection of bikes like this on the planet, but what's even more unique is that not only are they powered by an engine from the 1930s, these bikes are still highly competitive here even in 2022, and they still run at the sharp end of the pre-1968 racing class. So anyhow, in true Back to the Future fashion, we fast forward about 55 years and take a look here at Paul Morrow's 1984 RM 250 Suzuki. Now this 1984 Suzuki was the last of the drum brake bikes before Suzuki then switched to hydraulic disc stoppers, and this bike of Paul's is a very nice example of one of these relatively rare models. And once again, this water-cooled 250 two-stroke engine is one of the non-power valve motors, but despite that, as I recall, I think this was still quite a decent and compact little two-stroke motor. Now, as far as I know, this is the RM 250E version of their 1984 bike, and as I said, it was a liquid-cooled two-stroke with a 5-speed gearbox and a reed valve fueled motor. Now, Paul will be racing this bike in the twin shock grade B class, and before you actually see it and know that this is a single monoshock bike, but pre-1984 machines in Northern Ireland are still eligible to race alongside their twin shock counterpart. So if you check out my racing footage when I post it, you may even catch a glimpse of Paul in action on this machine. And I know I've actually said it before, but this Suzuki RM 250E of Paul's is yet another of those bikes that you very seldom see on the racetracks these days, and maybe later in the year we may take a more in-depth look at this bike in another video here on Classic Dirt Bike TV, so look out for that. Now, one of the other nice race bikes that I spotted during my Paddock walkabout on the Friday evening was Ivor McCree's quite nice looking YZ 490 Yamaha. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the year of Ivor's bike, but it certainly looks like it could maybe be a 1982 YZ, and these old air hammers, as they were called, didn't have the same popularity, of course, as the fantastic YZ 465 Yamaha that had gone before, because these bikes did have a bit of a reputation for being maybe difficult to set up with regards fueling and jetting the carbs, and they were also said to be quite hard to start when they were hot or cold, but that of course could also have been put down to the initial jetting problems. But that's not to say that these were bad bikes, because they weren't. They just needed some time spent on them to get everything set up correctly, and after you did that, these YZ 490s could certainly shift along, and they had more than enough grunt for your average club rider. And they still had drum brakes and Yamaha's monocross suspension system and alloy swing arm on the rear, which again, you had to take a bit of time over it to get the front and rear suspension sorted correctly. But as I said, get these old YZ 490s all fixed up and running right. There's not many bikes that will pass you on the racetrack, but if you're not prepared to put in the time to sort them out prior to racing, then these YZ 490s could certainly be a bit of a handful if you're not used to the way that they behave. But again, a nice example of an iconic YZ 490 from Ivor McCree. Now, this 1996 350 Husaberg was one of the many bikes that were offered up for sale over the course of the 2 days, and this 350, which was actually bored out to 400cc, was on sale for 2,100 of your finest Irish pounds. Now, this bike belonged to Andrew Breeden, who was selling it, and he said it's a bike that he very seldom uses now, so it's all surplus to requirements. So maybe if you're in the market for an older 4-stroke enduro or motocross bike, then this might be something you may be interested in. But Andrew's number is on the for sale sign attached to this bike if you need to maybe pause the video and take a note of it. But a nice bike for somebody there. That's Andrew Breeden's old 350 Husaberg. Okay, so next on our Paddock list is this old Yamaha 500 belonging to Stan McCormick. Now again, it looks like it's a bike made from an older TT500 Yamaha frame and motor, and it also looks like it might have the front end from a CZ bolted on to the front of the bike. But again, you can't fault the ingenuity of these Irish racers to utilise whatever they have lying around in their workshops. Although in terms of a power plant, Stan's certainly picked a cracker here in this big TT500 4-stroke motor, which of course is perfect for classic racing, and these big TTs have a very good reputation for ruggedness and reliability, and there's not much that goes wrong with these 4-banger Yamaha power plants. So Stan will certainly not be short of horsepower when he puts this on the racetrack. Now, Stan's other race bike is what looks like a big 4-stroke Honda machine, although with regards its chassis and all of the other parts bolted onto it, I haven't a clue what they are, because I never actually spoke to the man on the day to get the details. But as I said, it's definitely powered by this 4-stroke Honda motor, but there certainly seems to be a recurring theme with Stanley's motorcycles, in that it's pretty clear that he certainly likes his 4-stroke engines in his bikes, and that he's not loyal to one particular make or model, and he just uses what parts he thinks would fit well together, like this White Brothers tailpipe here that looks like it's come straight off a Yamaha R1 road bike. But of course, that's what classic and vintage racing's all about. Just use what you have and have fun doing it. And Stan certainly looks like that's exactly what he's achieved. So a nice couple of bikes there from Stan McCormick. And so next up, another big open class racer once again, and this is Jonathan McMaster's YZ490 Yamaha, and once more a real man's bike. And if you like masses of grunt and raw power on your race bikes, then step right up, because this is the bike for you. But once more, that big 490 YZ 2-stroke engine with the airbox drilled to let in more air to that Yamaha motor, which again is very similar to our previous YZ that we had a look at, although Jonathan's bike here has a change of exhaust expansion chamber from its original Yamaha part. Although, as I said before, once you get one of these YZ490s set up and running perfect, and you put a top rider in the saddle, then these old air hammer YZs are quick enough to take on anything on the racetrack, and at the very least, one of these bikes will put you on the bottom step of the winner's podium. But looking from the back of the bike, a single rear monoshock set up once again with Yamaha's monocross rear suspension system. And as far as I can remember, these YZ490 Yamahas did have reasonably good suspension both on the rear and here at the front, and they still had those old school twin leading shoe front brakes as well, which surprisingly were still good stoppers for an early 1980s motocross bike. But this example here is another beauty from Jonathan McMaster, and you can see this bike in action on the track soon when he races it in the Grade C class. And so as we move right along, here's a bike that you certainly don't see every day, a very nice 406 CanAm, of course powered by that ultra reliable Rotax two-stroke power plant. Now this bike here was one of two bikes that Matt Halpin brought along to the 2-day Charity Scramble event, and his other bike was a nice Italian-made SWM, which was still in the back of his transporter when I was grabbing these pictures of his CanAm. Now these early 1980s CanAms were, as you know, made by the Canadian Bombardier company, who manufactured all manner of motorised transports, including quad bikes and even snowmobiles. But as I said, this CanAm is powered by a 406 Rotax two-stroke engine, and although it has Bombardier on the casing, it's still essentially a Rotax engine. But again, this is a decent example of one of these very rare CanAms, and apart from a different exhaust system fitted onto it, it's still pretty much a stock bike as far as I can make out. And as we move down the front suspension, we have those old school drum brakes once again, which were good enough to stop the bike in a hurry, because these old CanAms weren't exactly heavy bikes, so these drum brakes were more than adequate and absolutely perfect for the job. And as we move on to the back end of the bike, we have another drum brake system with that very light alloy rear swing arm as well. Now, as you'd guessed, a plastic fuel tank for the 1980s, of course, and both the remote reservoirs for both of the rear shocks were bolted onto the chassis just behind the engine. But as I said, apart from a couple of non-original parts on this bike, this is still a very good original example of one of these CanAms, and as I said, you almost never see these bikes still take to the racetracks these days, so this indeed is a very rare treat to see one still being used. So well done to Matt for bringing it along. Okay, so next up we have another classic 4-banger twin shocker, and this time round it's the turn of Dean McBride and his big 500R Honda 4-stroker, another of those very nice big thumpers that are using that tried and tested 4-stroke XR500 engine in the chassis. And Dean will be racing this bike in the twin shock grade C class, so hopefully you'll be able to see Dean riding this bike in that formula when I eventually get around to posting all of the racing from this event. But what can you say about these big 500 XR motors other than they're almost indestructible, and they usually have more than enough grunt to satisfy even the quickest of 4-stroke racers. But of course, Dean's motor here appears to have had that clutch casing Cerakoted in that hard wearing Cerakote coating, just to help protect the casing from stone chips or other debris that may damage the paintwork. And again, at the back of Dean's bike, a decent set of YSS rear shocks, which again are very good suspension units, but they certainly look very long on the back of Dean's Honda, but that's maybe just to give him that little bit of extra ground clearance at the back when he's out there on the racetrack. But it looks like a big comfortable bike to ride with that long rear suspension and this very plush looking seat as well, and these handlebar handguards are very good investment if you're racing on stony tracks. But that one thing that surprised me on this bike was this extremely small drum brake on the front, which looks like it's been taken straight from a little Honda 50, because with such a big heavy 500 motor, this big XR wouldn't have been an easy thing to slow down. But a more realistic sized drum brake we have here on the back, which looks like the proper stock item for this bike, although I'm not exactly sure about all of the other parts on Dean's bike, but it all certainly looks like it's been built to suit his own personal specifications. But as you'd expect, many of the bikes featured in this Paddock walkabout were just a very small sample of the many machines that took part in the 2-day Charity Scramble here at Craigantlet, and there were literally hundreds more scattered around the paddock. But these were just a few of the very lucky ones that I could gain access to film. So that's another nice bike there from Mr. Dean McBride. So anyhow, just to wrap up our walk around the paddock from the 2022 Northern Ireland Charity Scramble, and just before you all fall asleep listening to me droning on, we're going to take a look at David Hamill's 1976 370 RM Suzuki twin shocker. But again, another of those bikes from our racing past that you seldom see on racetracks these days, and despite David's bike here maybe having different shocks fitted onto the back of his machine, this again looks like a very nice, honest, original bike. Now, the motor on David's bike is of course a single-cylinder two-stroke 370cc engine, which for 1976 was among one of the best power plants available on a Japanese open-class motocrosser. Now, these RM 370s certainly weren't the fastest of the bikes of their time, but nevertheless this was still a very good engine that was easy to ride and very competitive on the racetrack. Again, I'm pretty sure that these were Kayaba forks that were bolted onto these 370 RMs in 1976, and I think these gave the rider just over 8 inches of travel to work with at the front end. Now, as we move to the rear of the bike, it would possibly again have been a set of Kayaba rear shocks that would have been bolted onto this bike if you bought one brand new in 1976, but it's not surprising that at nearly 46 years old, this RM 370 now has a replacement set of suspension units bolted onto the back. But some of the other parts, including the bike's expansion chamber, are still original looking items, although this alloy tail cone at the back is a much more modern style replacement item. And as you can see, Suzuki in 1976 were still using these steel swing arms on their motocross RMs in that year, and they were also using the old school drum brakes again as well on the front and at the rear. But as I said, it's just quite good to see one of these 370s still being used as a twin shock race bike, and it's also thanks to the likes of David and many others who still do their very best to keep these race bikes running and out there on the track, where we can all see them once more in their natural racing environment. So there you have it, another nice twin shock classic. That's David Hamill's 370 Suzuki. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that brief walk around the paddock, looking at some of those very nice bikes that are soon to take part in this 2022 Classic Charity event. And don't forget, you can see all of the racing footage from both days here at Craigantlet if you just simply subscribe or tune in to my YouTube channel. So once again, thanks for taking the time to view my video content, and we'll speak again very soon.